We're sorry. The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number or try your call again. This is a recording.
Are you listening?
Listen to people. Learn what you can.
What is racist and what is just ignorance?
If you've got a friend or an ally or somebody in your corner there to support you, amazing.
I just can't wait for the day where we're no longer pleasantly surprised that someone is LGBT+.
Ask questions on a personal level, do better.
Asking pronouns.
It was like the moment that I realised I was different.
Winning that award topped this year off for me.
Because without you, this world wouldn't be the same.
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Welcome back to Are You Listening, the Oxfordshire Youth podcast. Are You Listening is a podcast for young people, by young people, to discuss all of the things that they're passionate about. At Oxfordshire Youth, we wanted to make sure that young people had a space to fully express themselves in a way that they felt completely confident about. And that's how this podcast was created. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, I'm Molly, and this episode we're going to be talking about sort of climate change, the climate crisis, and I just wanted to go over some definitions because I'm aware that in this episode I get a little bit eco-friendly, nerdy, and some of that terminology might be a little bit new to you. So just explain myself. So in this episode we talk about the climate crisis, which is sort of looking at the impacts of climate change, and the climate crisis is sort of the dangerous and irreversible changes that our environment is going through because of human pollution. And climate change is sort of the long-term changes that are happening to our environment. And this can be natural, fluctuations in temperatures and that sort of thing. But with the human interference with pollution, that sort of spirals out of control and becomes the climate crisis that we're seeing. And we also talk about sustainability, which is sort of avoiding the depletion of the Earth's resources, making sure that we as humans can safely coexist for a long time alongside our little planet. And a part of that of sustainability is greenwashing, which is a sort of advertising often used by sort of bigger brands that may not be as eco-friendly. This has especially started happening with the push for more eco-friendly and sustainable options. Bigger brands that aren't as sustainable will sort of bring out separate lines or something like that, or advertise in a certain way that makes them seem more eco-friendly than they are. For example, a fashion line might bring out a range of more sort of sustainable clothing. However, it's sort of important to be aware that while, we do want to encourage companies to be more eco-friendly, that, it's a tough balance between making sure to encourage larger corporations to be more eco-friendly while also being aware that other aspects of their business might not be so eco-friendly. While this isn't necessarily false advertising, because maybe that line really is more ethically made, but it is sort of misleading as we know that the rest of the company isn't that eco-friendly or ethically led.
Hello and welcome back to Are You Listening? Today we're getting into episode 2 of Activism, but this episode is sort of more specifically focused on climate activism, and we're fortunate enough to be here with Jemima from Oxfordshire Youth Strike. If you want to go ahead, introduce yourself, your pronouns, what you do, that sort of thing.
So hello, I'm Jemima. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the members of Oxford Youth Strike. So what we do is we organise school strikes for climate for the youth in Oxford, and we also hold other events sometimes.
Cool. I think I've been along to a couple of your events in the past, but a lot of that was before the pandemic, and I sort of wanted to know how Oxfordshire Youth Strike had sort of evolved, especially post-pandemic. I feel like a lot of the sort of media attention on striking for climate change sort of drifted away as lockdown sort of lifted. But I know that you guys are working hard to keep it strong, and just sort of give me an update.
Yeah, so you're right. A lot of attention sort of did drift away. So at first, during 2020, when sort of lockdown first hit, we had online strikes. I wasn't part of Oxford Youth Strike at that point, but there were online strikes over Zoom where people would, ditch school to go to these Zoom meetings. And they carried on for a few months, but as time went on, fewer and fewer people came because it just wasn't as interesting as in-person strikes. Since then, we've been trying to get in-person strikes sort of back up, but we don't have the engagement that we did before because we just lost lots of engagement over the sort of COVID time when everyone was doing other things.
Yeah. Oh, that's very clever though. Like, I hadn't thought of online strikes. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess sort of some of the big news this past month has been the heat waves. Personally, I don't do well in heat at all. I was just miserable. 2 whole days of just doing absolutely nothing. Couldn't bring myself to leave the fan. We've been sort of consistently setting new highs for temperatures every summer, and I'm guessing it's going to look this way in the future as well.
Yeah, it is. So it's only really predicted to get warmer, which is quite sad. For a lot of reasons, like, of course, it affects the natural wildlife. For a lot of people, it affects their income. Not quite so much in this country, but in other countries, drier and warmer ones, desertification is a really big problem. So there just isn't enough rain sometimes, or the soil erodes and the soil just can't be used to grow crops anymore. So that can be a big problem. But yeah, over here it's really warm.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a child, me and my family, we used to visit Australia a lot, and that in summer was usually sort of like 38 degrees. But it wasn't quite so bad because my cousins who we would visit, they had a pool, so we'd go and swim in the pool. Or I remember one day it was 40 degrees, and we went to see one of the new Star Wars movies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and inside the cinema they had air conditioning just on full blast, so that was great. But yeah, like being in the UK and having like 37 degrees in my house, I'm like, what's going on? Why is Australia in England? Like,
yeah. Yeah, that's another thing. We're not really adapted for it. None of the houses have air conditioning. They're all built to keep things warm. And
yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so in the UK, all of the houses are built to sort of be really warm in winter. They're made for these like cold winters with snow, usually quite cold temperatures and frosts. Whereas like places in, I think, warmer places in America, most houses have aircon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when we had the heat wave, like one of the local pubs near where I live and like the local Tesco's, like their fridges broke down because of the heat, things like that. So yeah, things in this country just weren't really made to be in that heat.
No. I was also wondering, as the sort of in-person strikes are becoming more and more possible, sort of how people could get involved, because I've gone along to every strike that I've heard about, but I'm aware that there are some that I'm sort of not in the loop for, and I was wondering how people can sort of get into it.
Yeah, so if you just want to like attend strikes and sort of attend as many as possible, the best thing is to just check social media. So whichever group is hosting a strike, they'll put it on their own social media. They'll create graphics for it, telling you where and when it is. And then often other local groups will share that on their social media so that other people will get to know about it. So yeah, if you just want to go along to strikes, I'd say check social media, keep an eye out. If you'd like to become more active in a group, so like be involved in planning or volunteer work, then check the group's social media and either they'll have some sort of like link or like join up form which you can go on and apply through, or they'll have contact information like their email, in which case you can email them, say, hey, I'm interested, I'd like to get involved, and they'll reply and say, oh yeah, sounds cool, and see what they can do.
That's cool. Yeah. And I guess a lot of what you do is also sort of education based, raising awareness. And I've noticed a couple of climate groups in Oxford have been sort of working with sort of the university and with businesses within Oxford to sort of help them to promote cleaner, greener, environmentally friendly living. And
yeah,
I was wondering about the sort of education side of things.
So yeah, a big part of like activism is not only sort of wanting change from the government, but is also allowing other people to know like what you're doing, what you're protesting about, or what you're campaigning for. So yeah, often like different groups get involved and they try and influence like banks or investing companies or big chains. It can be difficult sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are other things that we do often, like we put educational things on social media about just like the local news, like what's been going on in terms of like things like heat waves, or if there's a new paper published on like what we can expect in the future, often people will put that up, or just things that people can do in general to, you know, make their life more sustainable or help out where they can.
Yeah, that's good. I guess it's sort of finding a balance between making changes in your own life and campaigning for changes within governments and larger corporations, because there are times where activism, especially within sort of climate change, can feel quite hopeless. You're making all of these changes in your own life and you're not seeing them reflected within the government, and I was wondering how you can sort of handle that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because, you know, at home you might go through all these things, you might, you know, turn out all the lights, you might get your food from somewhere which sources things sustainably, you might only buy secondhand clothes, and then you read something which says, oh, this won't make any difference at all, it will delay climate change by 1 second. And that's quite sad and scary. And I think you have to think about like the impact those things, even though they might not make a huge difference by themselves, if you're, say, buying like only sustainable products or only from brands which source their materials sustainably, what you're doing is creating a market for those things. So if you're buying, I'm trying to think, like clothing made out of sustainable cotton, it means that companies are going to see, oh, people are buying this sustainable cotton over the cheaper mass-produced cotton. Maybe we'll invest more in the slightly more pricey stuff. And so that gives companies an incentive to change like how they work and how they source things. But yeah, and also activism. So activism, it promotes the governments to change, well, it encourages the government to change things, or that's the aim. So yeah, that can be difficult because oftentimes the government sort of says that they're going to do things, but of course it doesn't always happen immediately, or it can, sometimes it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be quite frustrating to sort of not see results, but I guess you sort of have to trust that you and your fellow activists are influencing people and are creating a demand for change.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, for me, what I like to do is look at some charities. Like often there will be charities aimed at sort of like planting trees or like regrowing this part of the rainforest or cleaning up plastic pollution in the oceans. And you'll see, you know, like in 2015, there'll be this tiny company, they like only, like no one knows about them. And then now 2022, like they're really big. They've got like this huge online thing. They're on social media. And when I see that, that makes me happy because when I see those sorts of things, it's like, oh, people do care and these guys are making a difference and they've got the money to make it happen. And I don't know, that helps a lot.
The wait is finally over. The Youth Awards tickets are finally here and we cannot wait to see you on the 17th of October at the New Theatre. Head to the New Theatre website to make sure you can get your tickets right now.
Yeah, it's great to see sort of smaller, more eco-friendly businesses and charities sort of growing. That's really nice, yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any sort of recommendations for eco-friendly charities, eco-friendly brands, that sort of thing, especially around Oxford.
Ooh, around Oxford?
I know that there's a zero waste store in, I think it's a smaller one in Wallingford. Oh, I really should have looked at the name.
Yeah. Oh. I'm trying to
I'll
think.
See if I can find a link. But I know that they're very good.
Okay, well, just generally, like wherever you live, local things. So, things like buying food from farmers markets or just markets in general instead of big chains. Buying your food from the butchers. Often they'll get their meat from closer. The animals will usually be better fed. Instead of getting, you know, cheap stuff from the supermarket. Also, it will probably taste better. In terms of clothes, usually secondhand shops are really good. You can find some really cool stuff. It's a lot cheaper. It means that clothes are being reused instead of new ones being generated. So yeah, try and stay away from sort of big brands. Try and go for like the smaller ones. If they're brands which sell like new clothes or new objects, they can be a bit more expensive, but that's usually because the workers who made the objects were paid better or the resources for the items were better sourced. If I think of like big brands who do things which are quite good, Ecofriendly is a search engine. They're pretty cool.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like Google, but the money which they generate from ads goes towards planting trees and similar things. What else? 4Ocean is pretty cool. So I think they're a charity. But they clean up oceans and beaches, so they clean up a lot of plastic. And then they use some of that plastic to make jewelry.
Oh, wow.
So that's really cool. So you can go on their website and buy their jewelry made out of sea plastic, and then that goes towards helping clean up more beaches. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, a lot of them tend to be sort of smaller, more local brands.
Small. Yeah, I'd say the best thing is to buy from sort of smaller, more local brands or ones that try to source things from nearby, ones which try to, you know, give their workers a living wage, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose with the sort of the brands, corporations side of things, there comes this phenomenon of, I think it's called greenwashing, where companies will try to sort of make their products look more eco-friendly than they possibly are. And I was wondering about sort of ways of combating this, how you can tell if something, what to look for.
So for those who don't know what greenwashing is, it's where something is advertised in a certain way to make it look really good for the environment. So an example I saw once a few years ago was a video, and it was about planting palm oil trees, and it said, oh yeah, we're planting all of these palm oil trees, they create shade for the natural, you know, creatures, they provide an area for bugs. But what that thing didn't tell you was they had to cut down the rainforest to do that, and the rainforest is so much more biodiversity dense, and just has so much more tree life, plant life in it, that the loss from that really isn't combated from, you know, these palm oil trees. So how to spot greenwashing? Ooh, I don't really know. I usually try really hard to buy my clothes secondhand. So yeah, buying secondhand is usually the best way to go.
Yeah, I guess you sort of have to have a degree of, I guess, skepticism when it comes to larger corporations, because oftentimes they didn't get that large by paying people a fair wage or by using sustainable means.
Yes.
So you sort of have to have a higher level of skepticism for larger corporations and stick to sort of local secondhand family-owned shops.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely like secondhand things or smaller things will be better. But I mean, yeah, spotting greenwashing can be hard. You can always sort of go into the company and look at them very specifically, or very closely. But yeah, even things like before I said like sustainable cotton like is a good option, and like yeah, it is better, but you know, cotton takes so much water to grow, loads and loads of water. Like there is an app, I think it's an app called Good on You.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think that's the right one.
Yeah, I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, if you go on it, it will tell you, you can search up brands and it will tell you sort of how sustainable they are. So in terms of environment, but also in terms of workers' rights, and a few other things. So that's really good. I've used that app a few times where it's like, okay, well, I have to buy something. Do I go to this shop or this shop? And so I go on this app and have a look, and it's like, well, this one's a little bit better for the environment, so I guess I'll go there.
Yeah, I guess one of the tough things is you sort of have to, sometimes you have to go with the lesser of two evils, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's not going to be a waste-free or a sustainable way around something. And so it's a matter of making an informed choice, of doing your research, and of picking something that will do less harm in the long run. Yes,
I'd say yeah. I mean, yeah, there are some things that you just have to buy new. Or there might not be a place where you can buy them secondhand. But yeah, if you buy them just sort of like you said, the lesser of two evils, that will still create a bit more of a market for that thing in terms of the sort of worst thing. So it still helps.
Yeah. And I've been looking into recently, as more and more people get into sort of sustainable or low waste lifestyles, a lot of people have been sort of going out and buying new things, and that seems to sort of defeat the object. And so I've been learning more and more about sort of repairing things, and oftentimes that can be helpful as well. If, say, in the past you bought a piece of, I don't know, clothing or something that wasn't as sustainable or wasn't as quality made, then rather than throwing it away, you sort of teach yourself how to repair it, and you can keep using it and wearing it, and that can make it slightly more sustainable in that it won't go to waste.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So yeah, say you buy, I don't know, a pair of jeans, or maybe not a pair of jeans, I don't know, maybe a jumpsuit. And it's made of cotton, like cheap cotton, like loads of water was used to make it, and you're like, oh my gosh, this jumpsuit, like a million liters of water went into this jumpsuit. I have to throw it away. So you throw away your jumpsuit and you buy a new jumpsuit made out of hemp or something. And you know what? That's great because you're supporting like someone who makes hemp clothing. But what you've also just done is thrown away a piece of clothing and bought a new piece of clothing, and that new piece of clothing still did require a lot of water and a lot of work to create. So yeah, instead of throwing away your old things and buying new things, first try and repair them. So, you know, your old cotton jumpsuit, you can keep that and wear it. And then when it starts to fray at the edges or it gets holes in it, instead of throwing it away and buying a new jumpsuit, try like learning to sew and sewing up those holes. It can be difficult at first, but you know, you might learn a new skill from it, and then your jumpsuit might last longer. And in the end, that will be more effective than buying some new thing, even if that thing says it's the best.
Yeah, you've got to sort of get the most out of what you have.
Yeah, sort of the most out of everything. I mean, yeah, the saying is like reduce, reuse, recycle. So it's kind of like reducing what you buy, and then with the things you have, reusing them over and over again until you can't anymore.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Anything you'd like to sort of promo that's maybe coming up?
So yeah, so for our next strike at Oxford Youth Strike, it will be in September, so it will be a global strike. So for other Fridays for Future groups, so Oxford Youth Strike is a Fridays for Future group, but other groups will, all over the world, will be striking on the same day. So we'll be striking on the 23rd of September. And here in Oxford, we'll be striking at 11 a.m. To try and avoid times of worship. So hopefully everyone can come.
Yeah.
And we'll be in Bond Square. So yeah, anyone can come. We're a youth organisation, so we encourage youth to come. But yeah, anyone can come. Anyone who wants to come is very welcome. But yeah, we'll be meeting in Bond Square. We'll have some marching, some chanting, a few other things maybe. We'll bring banners. It should be fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. I've had a great time. Thank you. I hope that I can see you at this strike, and I hope that we see some listeners. And yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. We've had a great time. We've been chatting about climate crisis, sustainability, greenwashing, and I hope it was interesting. Thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of Are You Listening, make sure you subscribe, whether you're on Anchor, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And also make sure you're following us on social media as well, at Oxfordshire Youth on Instagram and TikTok, and at OxYouth on Twitter.